There is a bonfire at the end of the world. It is not large, it does not roar. It simply burns quietly in the middle of a darkness so complete that the light it casts seems like a miracle, and around it, exhausted and nameless, and carrying wounds that should have killed them 100 times over, sit the people who made it this far. Not heroes, not chosen ones, at least not in any way that makes the choosing feel like a gift. Simply people who kept going when everything in the world told them to stop, who sat down at every bonfire they found and rested just long enough to get back up. Tonight we're going into one of the most intricate, most carefully built, most quietly devastating mythologies in all of gaming. The complete world of Dark Souls. All 3 games, every secret, every facts, every hidden connection, every character whose tragedy is buried so deep in item descriptions and environmental storytelling that most players walked past it without ever knowing they were walking past a masterpiece of quiet grief. Before we begin, get comfortable. Settle into wherever you are resting. Let your body find its stillness. Pull whatever warmth you have a little closer. This is going to be a long and slow and immersive journey, and there is nowhere you need to be and nothing you need to do except rest and listen. And before we go any further, tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight. Whether you are in your bed with the lights off, or at your desk with headphones in, or somewhere else entirely. I always want to know where these words find you. Drop your location in the comments. I read every single one. These facts will come one after another, slowly, with room to breathe between them. Some of them will reframe things you thought you understood. Some of them will make you see characters differently. Some of them are so precise and so carefully placed that they seem small until they connect to something else, and suddenly the whole picture shifts. So close your eyes if you like, and let me tell you about the Age of Fire and what it cost, and what was left when the cost came due. Long before any undead walked the earth, before the curse of the dark sign existed, before there were kingdoms or gods or chosen ones or bonfires to rest at, the world of Dark Souls was a place of grey. Not dark, not light, simply grey. Fog and stone and dragons who were as grey as everything else. Ancient and immortal and absolutely without warmth. The world before the first flame is not dramatic in any conventional sense. It is simply uniform, flat. A world without contrast. Without the possibility of difference, without the distinction between high and low, or bright and dark, or alive and dead, that makes a world feel like it has meaning. This age is called the Age of Ancients, and it is important to understand it not as a time of horror, but as a time of simple, complete stasis. Nothing changed. Nothing could change. The everlasting dragons sat atop stone arches in the perpetual grey, and the world simply was, without history or future or the possibility of either. If there was suffering in the Age of Ancients, it was the particular suffering of perfect stillness, of a universe that could not change and therefore could not grow, could not learn, could not become anything other than exactly what it already was. And then, in the darkness beneath the earth, the first flame appeared. No one knows where it came from. The game does not explain it. It simply appeared, and with it came something that had never existed before. Heat, light, the fundamental contrast between illuminated and shadowed. And in that contrast, in that sudden distinction between the warm and the cold, 4 beings discovered something extraordinary within themselves. They discovered souls, not in the philosophical sense, actual physical souls, condensed sources of power that fundamentally changed what they were. The four lords found their souls in the darkness near the first flame, and what they found changed everything. Gwyn found the soul of light, a vast, brilliant, illuminating power that made him the most formidable of the four and the one who would come to define the age that followed. The Witch of Izalith found the soul of life, a power associated with creation and flame, and the fundamental force of living things. The furtive pygmy, that most mysterious of the four lords, found the dark soul, the smallest of the great souls, but perhaps the most significant in the long run. The soul that would eventually be the inheritance of all humanity. And Nito, the first of the dead, found a soul that gave him dominion over death itself, over the end of things, over the great leveler that makes all living things equal. Here is the first extraordinary fact about the four lords. They were not always what they became. Before the first flame, before they found their souls, they were simply beings in the grey world, unremarkable, without special power or status. The souls did not reveal something that was always within them. The souls created something that had not existed before. The four lords are not predestined heroes of a cosmic story. They are ordinary beings who were in the right place at the right time and were transformed by what they found. This distinction matters enormously for understanding everything that follows. The Age of Fire was not inevitable. It was contingent. It happened because four specific beings happened to be near the flame when it appeared. A different four beings might have built a completely different world. Gwyn led the war against the dragons, the defining conflict of the early Age of Fire, and it is worth understanding how that war was won because the method says everything about who Gwyn was. The everlasting dragons were, as their name suggests, immortal. Their stone scales were impervious to conventional damage. Direct assault was ineffective. But Gwyn noticed something. The dragons were not simply armoured by their scales. They were sustained by them. The scales were not just protection. They were an integral part of what made the dragons what they were. And if the scales could be stripped away, if the dragons could be made vulnerable, then they could be killed. The dragon slayer Seath the Scaleless helped to make this possible. Seath was a dragon himself, born without scales, the single exception in a species defined by them. He was, by the logic of his own people, a defect, a failure, something that should not have existed, and he betrayed his kind. He provided Gwyn with the knowledge necessary to strip the dragons of their scales, to make them mortal, to end the Age of Ancients and begin the Age of Fire. In exchange, Gwyn gave him a dukedom, an archive, and the first piece of a great soul. Seath received everything he wanted, and he used it to pursue an obsession with immortality that consumed him so completely that by the time you encounter him in Dark Souls 1, he has lost his mind entirely, conducting mad experiments in his archive on unwilling subjects, searching for the very thing he betrayed his entire species to help destroy. The tragedy of Seath is in the gap between what he wanted and what he got. He wanted to not be a defect, to not be the wrong kind of dragon, to achieve through knowledge and power what his birth denied him. He achieved all of it. He became immortal eventually through the power of the primordial crystal he used to anchor his soul. He became one of the most powerful beings in Gwyn's kingdom. He was never again simply the scaleless dragon who should not have existed. And none of it was enough, because the thing he actually needed, the simple fact of being acceptable as he was, cannot be achieved through power or knowledge or the betrayal of everyone who shares your nature. He got everything he reached for and remained, at his core, the same being who had never felt like he was enough. His madness is not the madness of too much power. It is the madness of someone who reached for the wrong thing and got it. The 4 kings of New Londo were among the most trusted of Gwyn's human allies, given a fragment of his lord's soul as a gift and a mark of trust. They ruled the city of New Londo, one of the great human settlements of the Age of Fire, and they fell. The fall of the 4 kings is one of the most compressed and devastating stories in Dark Souls 1, told almost entirely through environmental evidence and item descriptions rather than through any explicit narrative. They were approached by the Dark Wraiths, servants of the Abyss, and they were offered power, the power of the Dark Soul in its raw and concentrated form, the power of the very thing that Gwyn and his civilization had been built partly to contain. They accepted. And New Londo fell into the Abyss. Gwyn's response was to flood the entire city, trapping the Dark Wraiths and the 4 kings and everyone else inside beneath the water, sealing the problem away rather than solving it. This is Gwyn's solution to problems throughout his reign. Seal them, flood them, lock them away, contain rather than confront. Every major catastrophe in the first game's backstory was handled this way, and every one of those contained catastrophes becomes a problem you have to deal with as the chosen undead. Gwyn's legacy is a world full of sealed doors behind which terrible things are still alive, waiting. The Witch of Izalith's story is one of the most heartbreaking in the entire trilogy. She attempted to recreate the first flame, to create a second source of the fundamental power that had initiated the Age of Fire, perhaps because the first flame was already beginning to fade, and she wanted to ensure the age would continue, perhaps out of simple ambition and the desire to understand and replicate the thing that had given her power. She failed. The chaos flame she produced was not the first flame. It was something else, something wrong. It consumed her and her daughters, transforming them into chaos demons, the bed of chaos. The boss you fight in the demon ruins is what remains of her. Not a monster in any conventional sense, a catastrophe wearing the shape of a person, a being who attempted something she did not fully understand and was consumed by the attempt in a way that was not death but was worse than death. Her daughters, most of them, were transformed alongside her into chaos demons of various kinds. But one, Quilana, escaped. She fled to Blighttown and spent the rest of her existence in hiding, the last survivor of a family that was destroyed by their mother's ambition. When you find Quilana in the game, she's sitting alone in a poisoned swamp, invisible to most players because she only appears once you have reached a certain level of pyromancy. She teaches you the highest levels of fire magic. She is competent and calm and helpful. And underneath all of that, she is the only surviving child of someone who destroyed herself and everyone around her, trying to recreate something she did not understand. Quilana does not discuss this unless pressed. She carries it, quietly, the way people carry things that are too large to put down and too painful to keep examining. The Pygmy, the 4th of the original lords, is perhaps the most mysterious figure in the trilogy's cosmology. He found the Dark Soul, and where Gwyn's Soul of Light was vast and brilliant and unmistakable, the Dark Soul was small, fragmented, divided into countless pieces that were distributed among humanity. This is the game's origin story for the human race. Humanity, as Dark Souls defines it, carries within it pieces of the original Dark Soul. The dark sign that marks the undead is not simply a curse. It is the mark of carrying a fragment of that original Dark Soul, a fragment that cannot be extinguished by ordinary death, that persists even when the body it inhabits stops functioning and drives it back toward a semblance of life. The furtive Pygmy is furtive for a reason. He understood something about the Dark Soul that the other lords did not. He understood that the darkness was not simply the absence of light, but a force in its own right, one with its own potential, and its own kind of power. He withdrew from the Age of Fire rather than opposing it. He waited. He distributed the dark soul through humanity, and he waited for the Age of Fire to run its course, knowing that what came after the fire, the Age of Dark, would be humanity's natural inheritance. Whether this makes him wise or simply patient in a way that required everyone else to suffer through the Age of Fire's consequences is a question Dark Souls never fully answers. Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, is the figure around whom everything in the first Dark Souls orbits, and he is one of the most complex characters in the entire trilogy, despite the fact that you never have a conversation with him. He speaks no lines, he gives no speeches. You encounter him only at the very end of the game, in the kiln of the First Flame, reduced to a hollow shell of what he was, and you fight him, and you either link the fire or you walk away. But the story of who he was and what he did is told across the entire game in the things he left behind, in the institutions he built and the decisions he made and the consequences that are still unfolding centuries after his death. Here is the central secret of Gwyn that most players do not fully register until their second or third playthrough. He was afraid. The most powerful being in the Age of Fire, the Lord of Sunlight, the God King whose lightning split the scales of immortal dragons, was afraid of the dark. Not the literal absence of light, the Age of Dark, the thing that his age was always going to become, the natural successor to the Age of Fire, the inheritance of humanity. He knew it was coming. He could see the first flame fading. He understood that the cycle of fire and dark was the fundamental rhythm of the world he lived in. And instead of accepting it, instead of preparing for it, instead of trusting that what came after the fire might not be catastrophe, he panicked. The linking of the fire, that act of self-sacrifice that Gwyn performed at the end of the Age of Fire, throwing himself into the dying first flame to feed it his own soul and extend the Age of Light, is not presented in the game as heroism. It is presented as a desperate measure, an act of profound fear dressed up as sacrifice. Gwyn linked the fire not to save the world, but to delay the dark that he could not face. And in doing so, he set in motion the entire cycle of chosen undead and linked fires and failed links and hollowing that defines the trilogy. Every undead who has ever been burned in the kiln since Gwyn was burned in service of his fear, every hollow you have ever fought was created by the curse his decision generated. The Age of Fire was extended, yes, at enormous cost, and it is still extending, still demanding more fuel, still consuming the undead. It sends to find that fuel, and the question that hangs over the entire trilogy is whether what Gwyn was afraid of, the Age of Dark, was ever actually as terrible as the things he did to avoid it. Gwyn's children are the most direct expression of his values and his fears, and each of them tells you something different about what those values cost in practice. Gwynevere, his daughter, the Princess of Sunlight, whose enormous image dominates Anor Londo, and whose presence is what most players think of when they think of the gods of Dark Souls, is an illusion. A projection maintained by Gwyndolin, her brother, after the real Gwynevere left Anor Londo with her husband Oxyros. The City of Gods, the most magnificent and terrifying location in the first game, is empty. It has been empty for a long time. The gods left. The giant sentinels maintain their posts. The Silver Knights patrol their routes. And in the highest chamber, an illusion of warmth and divine femininity is maintained by a god who was hidden away by his father because his nature embarrassed the sun god who wanted only sons who embodied strength and light. Gwendolyn is perhaps the most poignant figure in the first game's cast. Born with an affinity for the dark and the moon rather than the light and the sun, he was raised as a girl by Gwyn, dressed in the manner of a daughter rather than a son, hidden away because Gwyn could not reconcile his son's nature with his vision of what his children should be. Gwendolyn maintains the illusion of Anor Londo's grandeur not out of malice but out of devotion. He loved his father. He loves the city his father built. He maintains its appearance because letting it be known that the gods have abandoned their home would destroy the faith that the Age of Fire depends on. He is a god spending his existence in service of a lie, in a city that no longer deserves its reputation, out of love for a father who was ashamed of him. When you kill Gwendolyn, if you choose to, you are killing one of the last genuinely devoted servants of the Age of Fire, and the fact that the game allows you to do this, that it places the option in front of you without commentary, is Dark Souls at its most characteristically honest. You can do terrible things in this world. The game will not stop you, it will not lecture you, it will simply let you live with what you have done in a world that has become slightly emptier because of your choice. Gwyn's firstborn son, whose name is never spoken in the first game, was the god of war. The most celebrated warrior in the Pantheon. His image was removed from the game's intro cutscene deliberately, his statues stripped of their details in Anor Londo, his name excised from the official record. He was exiled, cast out. His covenant and his miracles were taken from him and distributed to others. He became the Nameless King. Why was he cast out? The answer comes in Dark Souls 3, in the Archdragon Peak, where the Nameless King has retreated to live among the ancient dragons, the very creatures his father spent the early Age of Fire destroying. He sided with the dragons, against his father, against the entire Age of Fire. Whether this was ideological, whether he genuinely believed the dragons had been wronged by Gwyn's war against them, or whether it was personal, a rejection of his father and everything his father represented, the game does not say clearly, but the evidence suggests both. The Nameless King found in the ancient dragons something his father's civilization could not offer him, something worth more than his divine inheritance, and he gave up everything for it. He is one of the hardest boss fights in the entire trilogy, fought atop a cloud-shrouded mountain in a storm that never ends, astride a storm drake whose size dwarfs everything around them. He is magnificent and terrible and genuinely beyond any simple categorization, as villain or hero. He is simply a god who chose differently than his father wanted and paid the price for that choice and found, in his exile, something that felt like home. The Silver Knights of Anor Londo, those elegant and devastating warriors who guard the city's highest reaches, carry a secret in their loyalty. They serve Gwyn directly, even after Gwyn is gone, even after the gods have abandoned Anor Londo, even after there is no one left to give them orders. They continue because they were trained to continue, because loyalty was so deeply embedded in their purpose that it persists beyond the circumstances that made it meaningful. They are not mindless. They are not hollow in the way that the undead curse produces hollowing. They are simply loyal past the point where loyalty has an object. They serve a lord who is not there, in a city that has been abandoned, with a dedication that would be admirable if it were not also completely pointless. This is Dark Souls' most consistent observation about institutions. They outlast their purpose. They continue their functions after the reasons for those functions have disappeared. The Silver Knights patrol, the Gargoyles guard, the giant sentinels stand at their posts. The Hollows repeat their last actions indefinitely. The world of Dark Souls is full of things that are still doing their jobs long after the job stopped needing to be done, and the specific kind of sadness this produces, the sadness of purposeful motion in service of nothing, is one of the trilogy's most characteristic emotional textures. Ornstein and Smaug, the two guardians of Guinevere's chamber in Anor Londo, are the most famous boss encounter in the trilogy, and one of the most discussed in all of gaming. But their secret is not in their difficulty or their design. It is in the fact that they should not both be there. Ornstein was a dragon slayer, one of Gwyn's 4 knights, famous across the world for his role in the war against the everlasting dragons. Smaug was the royal executioner, a man so brutal and so excessive in his methods that even the gods of Anor Londo would not give him a place among the knights despite his extraordinary power. They are not allies, they are not a team. They are two beings with nothing in common except their assignment, guarding a princess who is not there, in a city that has been abandoned, following orders that no one is left to rescind. When one of them dies during the fight, the other absorbs their power. This is not magic. This is survival in a world where the thing you are protecting has already left, and the thing you are told to do is the only thing you have left. They fight harder when one of them is gone, because what else is there? The purpose is gone. The charge is gone. The city is empty, but they are still here, and so they fight. The Dark Sign is the defining curse of the Dark Souls trilogy. It is the mark that appears on the skin of the undead, the brand that prevents true death, that pulls the soul back from the edge of oblivion and forces it to return to a body that is wearing out. It is, in the most literal sense, the thing that makes the chosen undead what they are, and most players experience it as a game mechanic, a death penalty, the thing that causes you to lose your souls and your humanity when you die. But the Dark Sign is a lore object as much as a mechanical one, and its secrets go deep. Here is the first secret of the Dark Sign. It is not a curse in the sense of something imposed from outside by a malevolent power. It is the natural expression of carrying a fragment of the Dark Soul. Every human in the world of Dark Souls carries a piece of the Dark Soul, that original fragment distributed by the furtive pygmy. The Dark Sign is what that fragment looks like when the Age of Fire is fading and the Dark Soul's nature is reasserting itself. It is not punishment, it is inheritance. The undead are not being cursed by the gods. They are being marked by their own fundamental nature, by the piece of the original Dark Soul that has always been inside them, emerging in response to the dying of a fire that was never supposed to last as long as it has. This reframes the entire premise of the Dark Souls narrative. The chosen undead is not a cursed individual on a quest to lift a supernatural affliction. The chosen undead is a human who carries humanity's natural inheritance, who has been drawn out of the ordinary world by the dying of an age, and who has been sent on a journey that is ultimately about deciding what humanity's inheritance means and whether it should be claimed or suppressed for another cycle. Hollowing is the process by which the undead lose themselves, and its mechanics are worth examining carefully because they are the most psychologically precise description in any video game of what depression feels like. When an undead dies repeatedly without restoring their humanity, they gradually lose themselves. Not their memories exactly, and not their skills or their physical capabilities. What they lose is their sense of purpose, their ability to hold on to why they were doing what they were doing. They become hollow, the game's term, which means they still move and still fight, but without the animating intention that made them a person rather than a function. The game never fully explains the mechanism of hollowing because it does not need to. Anyone who has experienced the grinding erosion of repeated failure, the specific way that doing the same thing over and over without success eventually strips away the conviction that the thing is worth doing, understands hollowing intuitively. It is not madness. It is not transformation into something monstrous, at least not initially. It is the quiet loss of the reason to continue. The hollows you fight throughout the game are not enemies in any meaningful sense. They are warnings. They are what you will become if you die enough times without finding something worth holding on to. The humanity mechanic in Dark Souls 1, that item you collect and consume to restore your human form and kindle bonfires, carries a secret in its description. Humanity is described as a dark, liquid humanity, a soft humanity. It is the concentrated fragment of the dark soul in a form that can be stored and used. When you consume humanity, you are literally taking in a piece of the dark soul, restoring your connection to the fundamental nature of humankind. This is why restoring humanity makes you more human in a gameplay sense, but also, in a lore sense, more connected to the dark. Humanity in Dark Souls is not simply the condition of being a person, it is the condition of carrying the Dark Souls heritage without being consumed by it. The human form is the form of a being in balance with its own darkness. Hollowing is what happens when that balance tips. The dark sign also connects to the concept of fire and dark in a way that most players miss. The undead who link the fire at the end of Dark Souls 1 are not simply sacrificing themselves to extend the Age of Fire. They are using the dark soul that they carry, that fragment of humanity's inheritance, as fuel for a flame that was always going to consume it. Every linked fire is a piece of humanity burned. Every extension of the Age of Fire is an extension built on the suppression of what humanity was always meant to become. The cycle is not simply repetitive, it is specifically consuming the thing it claims to protect. The undead die to extend an age whose continuation requires their continued sacrifice, and the dark soul inside them, the piece of the original pygmy's inheritance, is the fuel being burned. The Ringed City, revealed in the Dark Souls 3 DLC of the same name, contains the most complete answer to the question of what the furtive pygmy was actually planning. The Ringed City is where the pygmies were sent at the end of the Age of Fire, given the Dark Soul in its concentrated form, a dark soul that Gwyn bound with a ring to prevent it from growing too powerful. The pygmies were confined here, their power limited, their inheritance restrained, while the Age of Fire continued above them. They were not simply the last humans, they were the last humans deliberately contained by a god who feared what they carried. The ringed knight enemies you fight in the DLC carry armor that the gods bound to their skin as punishment for daring to link the fire without permission, for daring to claim the inheritance that Gwyn had decided was too dangerous to be freely exercised. They have been wearing that armor fused to their bodies since the Age of Fire began. They have been in that city contained, bound, denied their inheritance since before the first chosen undead was ever called. The anger that animates them is not the mindless rage of enemies designed to provide combat challenge. It is the specific, ancient, legitimate anger of a people who've been imprisoned in the name of someone else's fear. Dark Souls is populated by characters whose personal stories are so carefully constructed and so quietly told that they function as complete tragedies in miniature, nested inside the larger tragedy of the dying Age of Fire. Most players experience these characters as NPCs, as vendors, as questlines that either work out or do not, depending on whether you happen to be in the right place at the right time. But each of them, examined carefully, is a person with a history and a wound, and a specific relationship to the dying world around them that is worth understanding. Solaire of Astora is the most beloved character in the Dark Souls trilogy, and one of the most beloved in all of gaming, and his secret is in how much his warmth costs him. He is cheerful, enthusiastically, relentlessly cheerful. He offers cooperation. He leaves messages of encouragement. He greets you with genuine pleasure every time you find him. He talks about his quest to find his own sun, his own personal light, with an openness and a vulnerability that is startling in a world where everyone else guards their interiority carefully. Solaire does not guard his. He offers it, and he breaks. If you follow his questline without the intervention necessary to save him, he finds his sun. He finds what he believes to be his own personal light, a very small sun, a sunlight maggot infesting the bed of chaos area, and it is not his sun at all. It is a parasite, a crawling thing that attaches to his head and drives him mad, and when you find him again after he has found it, he is hollow. Not gone exactly, still present, still moving, still armed. But the thing that made him Solaire, that relentless warmth and openness and the specific quality of his hope, is gone. What remains fights you without recognition and without mercy. The secret of Solaire is what his quest for his own sun actually represents. He left Astora, his homeland, and came to Lordran, the dying kingdom at the centre of the first game, because he felt his purpose was here. He believed, with the sincerity of someone who has never learned to be cynical, that he would find what he was looking for, that the world would yield to his search if he searched with enough genuine intention. Dark Souls does not validate this belief. Dark Souls is, among other things, a game about what happens to hope that is not tempered by the understanding that the world does not owe you a meaningful ending. Solaire's warmth is real. His hope is real. And the world breaks him anyway, not out of cruelty but out of simple indifference to how much he deserved better. Siegmeyer of Katarina is perhaps the funniest and most sad character in the first game simultaneously. He is a rotund knight in onion-shaped armour who falls asleep in front of every problem he encounters, and who requires your help to advance through his questline with a cheerful obliviousness to his own dependence that is both endearing and heartbreaking. He talks about his great adventures and his bold decisions and his heroic deeds with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believes he is the protagonist of his own story. He is not. He is a supporting character in yours, and the gap between his self-perception and his actual situation is one of the game's gentlest jokes. But the end of his questline is not gentle at all. Siegmeyer's daughter, Sieglinde, has followed him into Lordran to find him, deeply worried about a father who wandered into a dying kingdom on an adventure and has not come home. She finds him, and then the questline reaches its conclusion in the Ash Lake, where Siegmeyer, having been saved one too many times, having accepted help he cannot reconcile with his image of himself as a hero, descends into hollowing. He is found in the Ash Lake, barely present, the heroic self-narrative that held him together, dissolving under the weight of everything he could not do on his own. Sieglinde kills him, off-screen. She tells you when you find her afterward that she had to. She is composed when she says it, but composition is not the same as peace. She found her father, whom she crossed a dying world to find, and she had to end him, and she thanks you for helping him get as far as he got, for the extra time your assistance gave her father to be himself. Sif, the Great Grey Wolf, is one of the most emotionally devastating boss fights in a trilogy full of emotionally devastating boss fights, and the secret of Sif is in the setup more than the fight itself. Sif guards the grave of Artorias, the Abyss Walker, one of Gwyn's 4 knights, the greatest warrior of the Age of Fire. Artorias fell fighting the abyss, the concentrated dark that consumed New Lundo and threatened to consume everything. He fell not because he was defeated, but because he sacrificed himself. He used his remaining power to protect his wolf companion, Seath, from the abyss. He threw his own great shield over the wolf to keep it safe, and then the abyss took him. Seath has been guarding his grave ever since. For how long? The game does not say precisely. Long enough that Seath is enormous, far larger than an ordinary wolf, sustained by whatever connection to Artorias remains in the grave. Long enough that Seath knows you need what is buried there, the ring of Artorias, which allows you to traverse the abyss. Seath attacks you not out of aggression, but out of love and desperation. The wolf cannot let you take the only thing that remains of the person who gave their life to protect it. When Seath is near death, the animation changes. The wolf begins to limp, holding the great sword that Artorias wielded, a sword far too large for a wolf, fighting with everything it has left to stop you from reaching what it loves. If you have visited Artorias in the past of the Ulakiel DLC, if you have seen Artorias fall, if you know the full story of what happened, fighting Seath at low health is one of the most quietly devastating experiences in any game. You know why the wolf is fighting, you know what is being protected, and you have to keep going anyway, because the game requires it, because the ring is essential, because the world does not stop and wait for you to feel the weight of what you're doing. Lautrec of Karim is a fascinating and infuriating character, whose secret is in how deliberately the game tempts you to trust him before revealing what he is. He is charming, he is polite, he is grateful when you free him from his imprisonment in the undead parish. He gives you a ring when you release him. He has a quality of easy confidence that makes him seem like someone worth knowing, in a world full of broken and desperate people. And then, if you're not paying attention, if you do not go back to Firelink Shrine at exactly the right time, he kills Anastasia, the Firelink Shrine Keeper, the mute woman who tends the bonfire at the hub of the first game, who gave you an Estus flask at the beginning, who asked for nothing. He kills her and takes her Firekeeper soul and uses it to empower himself. And when you confront him in Anor Londo to get it back, he offers no real explanation that satisfies. He serves his goddess. The Firekeeper's soul was valuable to him for reasons connected to that service. Anastasia was, from his perspective, simply a resource. This is the secret of Lautrec. He was never charming because he was good. He was charming because charm is a tool, and he is a person who uses people efficiently and without particular malice, but also without particular concern for what happens to them when they are no longer useful. He is the Dark Souls version of a perfectly ordinary kind of evil. Not dramatic, not monstrous. Simply a person who decided long ago that other people's well-being was less important than his own agenda, and who is good enough at presenting himself as likable that most people do not notice until it is too late. Artorias, the Abyss Walker, is the legend that most of the first game builds toward, the great hero whose fall preceded the events of the story, whose grave you visit and whose memory haunts the world. And the secret of Artorias is that he was already broken before the Abyss took him. In the Ulakiel DLC, when you travel back in time to the moment of his fall, what you find is a knight who has already been consumed by the Abyss's corruption, whose left arm hangs useless at his side, who fights with his sword held in his right hand in a style that is both impressive and heartbreaking, because you can see what it is missing. He was supposed to be the greatest warrior of the Age of Fire. He was supposed to stop the Abyss, and he failed. Not through lack of trying, not through any flaw of character, but because some things cannot be stopped by individual heroism, no matter how sincere or how skilled. The Abyss took Artorias and he kept going anyway, which is both admirable and terrible. He used the last of his uncorrupted power to protect Seath, and then the Abyss had him completely. When you fight him, you're fighting the greatest knight of the Age of Fire at his worst moment, corrupted and broken and reduced to a fraction of what he was, and even so he is one of the most dangerous opponents in the game. What was he at his best? The imagination required to answer that question is itself a kind of grief. The locations of Dark Souls are not simply settings, they are witnesses. They have been present for everything that happened in the Age of Fire, and they remember it the way stone remembers, in the evidence of their construction and their damage and the things that are conspicuously absent from them. Walking through Anor Londo or New Londo, or the ruins of Ulacieli is reading a history that was never written down, a record of events inscribed in architecture and atmosphere, and the specific kind of emptiness that occurs when something that was once full has been evacuated. Anor Londo is the most magnificent location in the first game, and the most thoroughly false. Everything about it communicates grandeur and power, and the specific confidence of a civilization at the height of its strength. The scale of the architecture is intentional and not merely aesthetic. Buildings that dwarf the humans who walk through them are buildings designed to make humans feel small, to communicate through spatial proportion the vast difference between the scale of the divine and the scale of the mortal. Gwyn built Anor Londo to be experienced as overwhelming, to make anyone who walked through its gates feel that they were in the presence of something so much larger than themselves that resistance or questioning was simply not a reasonable response, and it worked. The illusion of Anor Londo's power, maintained by Gwyndolin long after the city was emptied of its actual divine inhabitants, is so complete that most first-time players experience the city as genuinely awe-inspiring before any of the game's revelations about its true state. The awe the city produces is real, even when what produces it is not. This is perhaps the game's most pointed observation about the nature of divine power. The appearance of power and the reality of power produce the same emotional response in those who experience them. Gwyn understood this. He built Anor Londo accordingly. New Londo is what happens to a great city after the mistake that cannot be undone. It was sealed by flooding it, as we have discussed, because the four kings accepted the power of the Abyss and the Dark Wraiths had to be contained. But the flooding did not destroy New Londo, it preserved it. Walk through the drained lower areas of New Londo after you have removed the water, and what you find is a city that is largely intact, buildings still standing, paths still navigable, the physical evidence of a thriving civilization preserved in the cold, dark water that was meant to seal it away. New Londo is a monument to Gwyn's preferred solution to problems. He flooded it so he would not have to look at it anymore, and it remained, perfectly preserved, waiting. The ghosts that haunt New Londo before the water is drained are the residents who died when the city was flooded. They cannot move on because the mechanism that should process their deaths, the linking of souls to the flow of the world, was disrupted by the Abyss and the flooding and the seal that was placed over everything. They are trapped in the moment of their death, reenacting it indefinitely, unable to rest, unable to go anywhere, unable to be anything except the echo of what they were when Gwyn decided their city needed to be sacrificed to contain a problem he'd created by trusting the wrong people with fragments of his power. Oolacile is perhaps the most tragic location in the first game's lore. Not because of what it became, but because of what it was before. It was a peaceful kingdom with a unique relationship to the Dark Soul, a civilization that practiced magic derived from the dark rather than from sorcery or faith, and that lived in proximity to the abyss without being consumed by it. They were, before the events that destroyed them, evidence that the dark did not have to be catastrophic, that the inheritance of the pygmy could be worked with rather than simply feared. Then Manus happened. Manus, father of the abyss, was a human pygmy, one of the original bearers of the Dark Soul, who was buried somewhere near Oolacile and whose grave was disturbed. The disturbance, combined with his age and the power of the Dark Soul he carried, caused him to transform, to become something enormous and terrible, an embodiment of the concentrated Dark Soul without any of the humanity that usually contains it. His awakening corrupted Oolacile, pulling the city's residents into the abyss, transforming them into the Oolacile residents you fight in. The DLC, beings who still look vaguely human, but who have lost everything that made them people. The fact that Manus was originally simply a man, that the father of the abyss was a human being with a human soul who was pushed past the point of no return by violation of his grave and the weight of years and concentrated dark, is the DLC's most important revelation. The abyss is not an external evil that attacked Oolacile from outside. It is something that grew from within a human being who was not treated with the care his nature required. Manus is what happens when the dark soul inside a human being is left without the balance of humanity, without the relationships and the purposes and the small meaningful things that make people more than just vessels for ancient power. He is loneliness and violation and age and the specific kind of madness that comes from carrying something enormous without anyone to help you carry it. Ash Lake is one of the most remarkable locations in the first game and one of the least visited. It sits at the very bottom of the world, beneath Blighttown, accessible through a hidden passage that most players either miss or do not pursue because the path to it is unpleasant and unmarked. But Ash Lake contains two things that are worth any amount of effort to find. The first is the visual, a vast underground ocean beneath a sky of pale stone with enormous white trees growing at its shore, the arch trees that are referenced in the game's opening myth as the first trees of the age before the first flame. You're standing in the world as it was before Gwyn's age changed everything, before fire, before souls, before the chosen undead, or the dark sign or any of the catastrophes that define the world above. The second thing Ash Lake contains is an everlasting dragon, one of the ancient beings of the age before fire, still alive, still here, still sitting in the same location they have occupied since before the world above was built. You can join the Dragon Covenant here. You can sit beside this ancient creature and acknowledge the world it represents, the age before fire, the age of grey and dragons and uniform eternity. And the game treats this choice with the same neutrality it treats every other choice. You can serve the age of fire. You can serve the dark. You can sit beside the oldest thing in the world and acknowledge that the age of fire was not the beginning of everything, that there was something before it, and that something still exists. Dark Souls 2 takes place in Drangleic, a kingdom built on the ruins of previous kingdoms, which was built on the ruins of previous kingdoms before them, in a cycle of collapse and reconstruction that predates the events of the first game by potentially enormous spans of time. The central revelation of Dark Souls 2 is that the linking of the fire is not a singular heroic act that happens once. It has happened many times. There have been many chosen undead, many ages of fire, many ages of dark, many kingdoms that rose in the warmth of a linked fire and fell when that fire faded. Drangleic is not the world after Dark Souls 1, it is the world after many Dark Souls 1s, each one forgotten by the next, each one having believed itself to be the final story when it was simply one more cycle in an endless repetition. This is the most significant fact about Dark Souls 2, and the one that gives the entire game its specific quality of melancholy. Everything in Drangleic has happened before. The undead curse that afflicts the bearer of the curse is the same curse that afflicted the chosen undead of Lordran. The ancient souls sought by the bearer are the remnants of Lord souls from previous cycles. The bosses you fight are echoes of previous cycles' heroes and villains, their identities blurred by time and repetition into archetypes. The rotten is a composite of countless fallen bodies. The skeleton lords are echoes of Nito's domain. The lost sinner echoes Izalith's mistake. They are not simply difficult enemies. They are the lore of the first game refracted through the lens of centuries of repetition, until they are almost but not quite unrecognizable. King Vendrick is Drangleic's version of Gwyn, and the comparison is instructive. Where Gwyn was vast and powerful, and made his terrible choice out of fear, Vendrick is broken and humble, and makes his terrible choice out of love. He built Drangleic. He conquered it. He was its greatest king, and then he fell in love with Nashandra, a fragmented piece of Manas's soul given human form, a shard of the abyss walking in the shape of a woman who whispered ambition into his ear and guided him toward catastrophe. He invaded the giant lands for her. He fought wars that did not need to be fought. He gathered giant souls that Nashandra wanted for her own purposes. And by the time he understood what she was and what she had done, it was too late for anything except refusal. Vendrick refused to link the fire. He refused the role of the sacrificed king that the cycle demanded. He retreated into his crypt with a single loyal undead as company, and he left instructions designed to prevent others from following in his footsteps, to prevent the cycle from continuing, to break the pattern if such a thing was possible. He hollowed completely, eventually wandering the corridors of his crypt in silence, enormous and broken and wearing his crown to the very end. When you find him, he does not fight you unless you attack first. He simply walks. He has been walking for so long that the stone beneath his feet has been worn into a path. He's doing the only thing left to him, moving through the space of his failure, endlessly, without purpose, without resolution, without the mercy of an ending. The fact that killing Vendrick is optional in Dark Souls 2, that you can complete the game without ever finding him or engaging him, is a design decision that carries enormous weight. Gwyn had to be fought. The Age of Fire demanded it. Vendrick does not have to be fought. His story can simply be witnessed. You can walk past him, read his story in his ring and his armour, and the whispers of the people who knew him, and leave him to his endless walking. The game does not require you to end him. It simply makes him available as the saddest optional encounter in the trilogy. Aldia, Scholar of the First Sin, is Vendrick's brother and the most philosophically complex character in Dark Souls 2. He sought the answer to the undead curse through radical experimentation, transforming himself through increasingly extreme means in search of a way out of the cycle. By the time you encounter him in the Scholar of the First Sin version of the game, he has transformed himself beyond any recognizable form into something that appears as a twisted mass of branches and fire, an entity that exists outside the ordinary categories of living and dead, hollow and human. He found his answer. The truth is that there is no answer. The cycle continues. because it is the nature of the world, and there is no escape from it except the kind of transformation he underwent, which costs everything that made you human to begin with. Aldir challenges you at the end of the game not to fight but to choose. He presents the choice between linking the fire and walking away not as a moral question but as a philosophical one. He does not tell you what to do. He simply makes it clear that both choices are available and that neither is obviously correct. He is the game's clearest voice in the conversation that the trilogy has been having with itself across 3 games about whether the Age of Fire deserves to continue, and his answer is not yes or no, but simply, this is the choice and it is yours to make, and the weight of it will not be reduced by any argument I can offer you. The giants of Dark Souls 2 are not the same giants as those in the first game, but they carry echoes of that conflict in their hatred of humanity. Vendrick invaded the giant lands. He took from the giants a power that was theirs and brought it back to Drangleic. The giants came in response, crossing the ocean to wage a war that devastated Drangleic's shores, and that is still present in the physical evidence of the game's first area. The bodies of giants half buried in the sand of things betwixt, and the ruined siege engines scattered across the landscape. The war between humans and giants in Dark Souls 2 is not presented as heroic conflict. It is presented as consequence. Vendrick took something that was not his. The giants came to get it back. The fact that this is treated as a foreign invasion rather than a justified response says something about the perspective from which the game's official history was written. Dark Souls 3 takes place at the end of everything. Not the end of a cycle, though it is that too. The actual end of the very possibility of the cycle continuing. The fire has faded so many times, been linked so many times, been extended through so many sacrifices of so many undead, that it is now barely capable of burning at all. The kingdoms built on previous cycles have collapsed, and their ashes built up into new geography. The undead settlement sits on layers of accumulated history so deep that the original ground is irrelevant. The road of sacrifices leads through land that has been fought over so many times that the war is simply geological. The landscape, the default condition of the world rather than an event within it. The Lords of Cinder, those who have previously linked the fire and been consumed by it, and then somehow returned to a semblance of existence, have abandoned their thrones. They were called back to link the fire again, called by the tolling of a bell that signifies the fire's final fading, and they refused. They fled their thrones and returned to the world, and are encountered throughout the game in various states of deterioration and madness. They were supposed to sacrifice themselves again. They chose not to, and the Firekeeper and Firelink Shrine waits, and the thrones sit empty, and you are sent to retrieve what the Lords of Cinder abandoned. Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, began as a cleric of genuine faith and genuine service. He fed the poor. He performed his religious duties. He was, by the ordinary measures of a religious community, a good man. And then he began to have visions, dreams of a deep, dark ocean, of ancient beings consuming each other in the depths, and he began to eat people, not out of hunger in any ordinary sense, out of a spiritual conviction that consumption was divine, that devouring the souls of others was a form of communion, that the deep that called to him in dreams was a god worth serving. By the time he was encased in his coffin and worshipped as a saint by the Cathedral of the Deep, the conversion from cleric to devourer was complete, and the only question remaining was the scale of what he would consume. He consumed Gwyndolin, He devoured the last god of Anor Londo, the keeper of the city's illusions, the one being who had maintained the pretense of the Age of Fire's grandeur past all reason. In his boss fight, Gwyndolin's half-consumed body writhes within Aldrich's mass, still animate, still present, still dying in the specific slow way that being consumed from within by something else produces. It is one of the most horrifying images in the trilogy, and one of the most complete. Aldrich's faith, his genuine spiritual conviction, his belief that he was serving something real and divine, led him here. Not to simple evil, but to something worse, an evil that understood itself as sacred. Yorm the Giant is one of the most straightforwardly sympathetic of the Lords of Cinder. He was a giant who ruled over a village of humans, who protected them, who was loved by them. He became a Lord of Cinder in part because linking the fire was the only way to protect his people from the chaos that would have consumed them otherwise. He sacrificed himself for them, and by the time of Dark Souls 3, his people are gone. The village he protected has become the profaned capital, a ruin haunted by the descendants of the people he saved, reduced to monsters by time and the fading of the fire. He sits on his throne as a Lord of Cinder, and when he is called back to link the fire again, the thing he linked it to protect no longer exists. His boss fight is unique because it requires a specific weapon, the Storm Ruler, a weapon that a friend left for you at his feet knowing that you would need it. His friend Sigward, a knight in the same onion-shaped armour as Siegmeyer from the first game, some descendant or follower of that tradition, has dedicated himself to keeping a promise to end Yorm's suffering, if it ever came to that. The friendship between a giant lord and a human knight who wears ridiculous armour and is often found sleeping in inconvenient places is one of the trilogy's most quietly touching relationships, and the fact that it ends with that knight fulfilling a promise made out of love for someone who had given everything is one of the most complete and most compassionate moments in the series. The Ringed City DLC is the final piece of the Dark Souls puzzle, and the most explicit statement of the trilogy's central argument. It takes you to the end of the world, to the city at the edge of all the ages, where the pygmies were sent and where the concentrated Dark Soul has been building for longer than any of the histories we have encountered can fully encompass. And at the end of it you fight the slave knight Gale, a man who has consumed the dark soul of every pygmy in the Ringed City in an attempt to gather it for a painter in Ariandel, who needs the dark soul's blood to paint a new world, a new cycle, something that might grow into something different if it has the right material. Gale is ancient beyond comprehension by the time you fight him. He has consumed so many dark souls that he is barely human. More dark soul than person. A vessel for humanity's inheritance that has been filled past any capacity to hold it cleanly. He fights with the desperation of someone who has already given everything and needs only to hold on a little longer. The lightning and the dark energy he commands are not his. They are the accumulated power of countless human lives, all of their fragments of the dark soul concentrated into one body that was never meant to hold so much. When you kill him, you receive the dark soul of humanity, the thing that Gwyn feared, the thing the entire trilogy has been circling. The inheritance of the furtive pygmy, concentrated and complete, and the painter takes it and paints her world, and the cycle continues in whatever form it takes in that new world that begins in the darkness of a canvas before the fire reaches it. The endings of the Dark Souls trilogy are among the most debated in all of gaming, and for good reason. They do not resolve cleanly. They do not deliver the satisfaction of a narrative that knew where it was going and arrived there triumphantly. They deliver something harder and more honest. The satisfaction of a narrative that's told the truth about what endings actually look like in a world where the stakes are cosmic and the choices are real. Dark Souls 1 offers two endings: Link the Fire or Walk Away. Both have been discussed endlessly. But here is the secret that most analyses miss. Both endings are temporary. Linking the Fire extends the Age of Fire but does not end the cycle. Walking away into the dark begins the Age of Dark but does not end the cycle either. The cycle is the point. The cycle is what the world of Dark Souls is. It is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be understood. The choice between linking and walking away is not the choice between right and wrong. It is the choice between participating in one form of the cycle or another, between feeding the fire that Gwyn built or allowing the dark that the pygmy seeded. Neither is salvation. Both are simply the next iteration of the same fundamental rhythm. Dark Souls 2 adds to this understanding by making the repetition explicit. Vendrick's refusal to link the fire is not presented as obviously correct. Aldia's wisdom is not presented as obviously applicable. The throne of want sits empty, and the player sits on it, and the game simply ends. Not triumphantly, not tragically, simply as an acknowledgement that the choice was made and the cycle will continue, and what matters is whether the choice was made with full understanding of what was being chosen. Dark Souls 3 offers the most endings and the most explicit engagement with what each of them means. Linking the fire one last time, when the fire is so faint that linking it barely produces a result, is an act of pure, stubborn loyalty to a cycle that has long since lost its justification. The Firekeeper ending, in which you give the Firekeeper eyes and she extinguishes the flame and guides you into a darkness that she believes is not the end but simply the next state, is the most hopeful ending the trilogy offers. Not hopeful in the sense of cheerful or comfortable. Hopeful in the sense of trusting that what comes after the fire is not nothing but something that has not been tried yet. Something that the Age of Fire's endless self-preservation has been preventing from beginning. And the usurpation of fire, the ending in which you claim the fire for yourself and become the Lord of Hollows, the Dark Lord that Gwyn feared, is the most complete fulfillment of the cycle's dark inheritance. A human claiming what was always humanity's and burning with it. None of these endings is simply good. None of them is simply bad. They are choices about what kind of world you want to build from what remains, made in full knowledge of what the world has been and what it has cost. We have travelled through an enormous span of history tonight, from the age before the first flame through 3 games, 3 cycles, countless characters and locations, and secrets and hidden truths. And we arrive, as we always arrive at the end of these journeys, at the question that the journey was always moving toward. What does it mean? Dark Souls is, at its simplest and most fundamental level, a story about cycles, about the way that things that were built to last do not last, about the way that institutions extend themselves past their usefulness, about the way that the fire that gave warmth also eventually demands sacrifice, about the way that the people who come after inherit the consequences of choices they did not make, in worlds shaped by fears and ambitions that predated their birth by centuries. But it is also a story about persistence, about the specific human quality of continuing when everything argues against continuation. The bonfires of Dark Souls are not simply respawn points, they are the game's most honest image of what hope looks like in a world that does not offer easy comfort, a small fire, a moment of warmth, enough rest to get back up. The bonfire does not promise that the next attempt will succeed. It does not promise that the world will become easier, or that the darkness will recede, or that the cycle will end. It simply offers rest, and then the fire at your back when you walk back into whatever comes next. The chosen undead, the bearer of the curse, the Ashen One. These different names for the player character across the 3 games share one characteristic above all others. They keep going. Not because the game promises them a good outcome, not because the lore tells them their sacrifice will be honoured or their name remembered, simply because there is a next thing to do and they are capable of doing it, and so they do it. This is not heroism in any grand sense. It is something quieter and more durable than heroism. It is the simple, stubborn, entirely human refusal to be finished when there is still something unfinished ahead. This is why Dark Souls resonates with so many people who've never played it, who encounter its philosophy second-hand, who hear the phrase "you died" and understand immediately what kind of experience is being described. The game is not about being powerful or being chosen or being special. It is about being inadequate to your situation and continuing anyway. About dying and returning. About the specific lesson that only repeated failure can teach. That the obstacle which seemed impossible can become possible if you are willing to pay attention to why you failed and try again with that knowledge. This is not a comfortable lesson. It is not a lesson that makes failure painless. But it is a true lesson, and truth has its own kind of comfort. Before we close tonight, I want to take a moment to pause and thank you for being here through all of this. We've been through the Age of Fire, through the Lords and their lies and their love and their fear, through the undead curse and the people it touched and broke, and sometimes, occasionally, made into something worth remembering. If this journey through the world of Dark Souls meant something to you, please subscribe to Nightfall Lore and leave a comment. Drop your location below. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me which fact landed hardest, which character you saw differently, which secret changed something about how you understood a game you thought you knew. I read every single comment, and they are the reason these videos exist. And now, rest. You have been in the dark for a long time tonight. You have walked through ruins and listened to the stories of people who are trying and failing and continuing, who are afraid and hopeful and wrong and occasionally right, who are living inside a dying age with whatever they could find to hold on to. The fire is low tonight. It always is. But it is still burning, and there is still room beside it if you need somewhere to sit for a while before you go back out into whatever comes next. One of the most extraordinary things about the Dark Souls trilogy is the way the 3 games speak to each other across enormous spans of time, placing details in one game that only become fully comprehensible when you have played the others. These connections are not Easter eggs. They are not simply fan service. They are the evidence of a world that was planned with a consistency so deep that it operates at the level of archaeology rather than storytelling. You do not simply read Dark Souls, you excavate it. The most significant cross-game connection is also the simplest to state and the most staggering to sit with. The demon ruins of Dark Souls 1, that volcanic hellscape created by the Witch of Izalith's catastrophic attempt to recreate the First Flame, is the same location as the Iron Keep of Dark Souls 2. The Iron Keep is sinking. It has been sinking since it was built, too heavy for the ground beneath it, driven downward by its own weight, descending toward the magma below. And what is below the magma? The demon ruins. The keep has been sinking toward the ruins of Izalith's catastrophe, toward the corrupted lava that the Chaos Flame produced, across what must be thousands of years. The lore of the second game is literally descending into the catastrophe of the first. The painting world of Ariamis in Dark Souls 1 and the painted world of Ariandel in Dark Souls 3 are both worlds created within a painting by a painter who used ash and blood as their medium. The painted world in the first game has grown old and cold, its creator long dead, its residents having adapted to a frozen existence in a world that was beautiful once, and has persisted past that beauty into something more complex and more melancholy. The painted world in the third game is also old and cold, also frozen, also home to residents who have adapted to conditions they did not choose. And at the end of the Ariandel DLC, a young painter is creating a new one, a new world, a new painting, using the Dark Souls blood as her pigment, as we have discussed, building something that might be different if given the right foundation. The connection between the three painted worlds, the one being built in Ariandel, the one you can visit in the first game, and the existence of the medium of painting as a way of creating genuine sub-worlds outside the main cycle, raises extraordinary questions about what the painter's new world will become. Is it another iteration of the same cycle, painted differently, but following the same fundamental pattern? Or is a world built on the Dark Souls blood rather than on the fire of Gwyn's sacrifice fundamentally different in some way that might break the pattern? The trilogy does not answer. But the fact that all three games gesture toward painting as a creative act that exists outside the main narrative suggests that the answer, if there is one, lies somewhere in that creative space. The giants of Dark Souls 1 are different from the giants of Dark Souls 2, and the difference is significant. The giants of the first game are the ancient beings who predate the Age of Fire, stone-like and enormous, barely distinguishable individually, part of the landscape as much as part of the story. The giants of the second game are people, distinctive individuals with faces and histories, who crossed an ocean to reclaim what was taken from them. They are not simply large humans in the way that fantasy giants often are. They are separate people with a separate culture who made the terrible mistake of being neighbours to a kingdom that decided their power was worth taking. The Throne Watcher and Throne Defender. In Dark Souls 2, those two knights who guard the Throne of Want at the game's end are echoes of Ornstein and Smaug from the first game, not literally the same characters, but functionally identical, two guardians of a significant location with complementary fighting styles, one of whom absorbs the other's power when defeated. The echo is deliberate. Dark Souls 2 is full of these deliberate echoes, these recycled archetypes that feel familiar without being identical, because it is a game about a world where the same patterns repeat across cycles. The Throne Watcher and Defender are not homages to Ornstein and Smaug. They are evidence that the same kinds of loyalties and the same kinds of pairings and the same kinds of desperate final guardianship arise in every cycle. Because these patterns are not accidents of individual biography, but expressions of the fundamental dynamics of the Age of Fire. The abyss that appears in all three games is worth tracing across the trilogy, because its nature becomes clearer with each iteration. In the first game, it is a localized catastrophe, the specific corruption that consumed New Londo and Ulukyle, associated with the Four Kings and Manus. In the second game, it is more diffuse, present in the darkness beneath Drangleic, in the hollowing that afflicts the undead, in Chandra's nature as a fragment of Manus. In the third game, it is everywhere. The Pontiff Sulivan's knights are Abyss Watchers. The Abyss Watchers themselves are an entire covenant dedicated to hunting the Abyss's incursions. The corruption from Ariandel is abyss adjacent. The ringed city sits at the edge of the age where the dark soul in its full concentrated form resides. The abyss grows across the trilogy not because it is winning, but because the age of fire's extension has created more and more conditions favourable to its expression. Every linking of the fire that prevents the age of dark from beginning is also a delay of the process by which humanity's dark soul inheritance would naturally be resolved. The concentrated pressure of all that delayed inheritance has to go somewhere. It seeps through in the form of the abyss, finding the cracks in the Age of Fire's structure and pressing through them. The abyss is not the enemy of the Age of Fire, it is the Age of Fire's consequence, the darkness that accumulates when you keep a door locked against the dark. Patches appears in Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, Demon Souls, and Bloodborne. He is always a liar, he is always a rogue, he always eventually becomes a merchant, he always has a complicated relationship with clerics, he is, across the entire From Software catalogue, the same person, doing the same things, navigating catastrophic worlds with the same flexible ethics and the same cheerful willingness to apologise after the fact. His presence across games that are not in the same narrative continuity is the game's acknowledgement that there is a type of person who always exists, in every catastrophe, in every dying age, who finds a way through by being adaptable and not particularly scrupulous, and eventually surprisingly useful. Patches is not heroic, he is survivable, and sometimes that is what the situation requires. Every item in the Dark Souls trilogy has a description, and the descriptions collectively form a history more detailed than anything the game tells you directly. Most players read these descriptions once, if at all, and move on. But the item descriptions are where the game keeps its most specific and most personal stories, the information about individual people and their specific fates that would slow the game down unbearably if delivered through dialogue, but that rewards the player who takes time to read. The Grass Crest Shield, one of the most popular early game shields in Dark Souls 1 because of its stamina regeneration bonus, carries a description that notes it is decorated with a grass crest that has long been a symbol of prosperity. Prosperity for what? For whom? The shield does not say. It is simply a detail, a trace of the civilization that made it, a reminder that the people who lived in these ruins had ideas about what prosperity looked like and made objects that symbolized those ideas. The world was not always ruins. Someone made this shield in a time when shields were made and people thought about what to decorate them with, and chose grass because grass meant growth, and growth meant hope. That person is long dead. The hope outlasted them in the shape of a crest on a piece of metal. The dingy robe worn by the maiden in black in Demon Souls appears in a Dark Souls 2 as an item you can find, its description noting that it once belonged to a woman who guided lost souls. The maiden in black was a figure who helped undead in another world, another time, another cycle, and her clothes washed up in Drangleic as an item pickup. This is either a simple piece of From Software fan service or evidence that the worlds of the different games exist in some relationship to each other, that the cycles are not simply sequential but somehow adjacent, that the things lost in one world can be found in another. The game does not explain. It simply places the dingy robe in a chest in Drangleic and trusts you to recognize it and wonder. The Estus Flask is the fundamental healing item of the trilogy, and its origin is worth understanding. It is filled with the fire of bonfires. The bonfires are the residue of the first flame scattered across the world, maintaining warmth in a world that is always cooling. When you drink from the Estus flask, you are drinking fire. You are taking the warmth of the Age of Fire directly into your body and using it to heal the wounds that the dying age has inflicted on you. The Estus is not magical in any conventional sense. It is the literal substance of the thing that gave the Age of Fire its existence, bottled and consumed by the undead who served that age. You are being sustained by the very thing you have been sent to preserve. The Darksign Grass Crest, the Dark Hand, the rings associated with the Four Covenants, all of them carry histories in their descriptions that elaborate the lore in ways that would fill many hours of careful reading. The Covenant rings in particular tell stories about the organizations they represent with a compression and a specificity that is remarkable. The Ring of the Sun's Firstborn, found by praying at the statue of the nameless god in the Sunlight Altar, tells you that the covenant it once represented belongs to a god whose name was stripped from the records, a god who was exiled. You are wearing the ring of someone the official history has tried to erase, and the ring's continued existence and its presence in the world is a quiet argument against the success of that erasure. The weapons associated with specific characters carry their histories most explicitly. Artorias' great sword, his actual weapon, can be created in the first game using his soul, and its description notes that it was stained black because Artorias fell to the abyss. The stain is permanent. It cannot be cleaned. The weapon remembers what happened to the person who wielded it, in a way that metal should not be able to remember but does, because in Dark Souls, souls leave traces in the objects they inhabit, and a soul as powerful as Artorias' leaves a trace that nothing can remove. Sieglinda's steel twin blades, which you can acquire from her character, are the weapons of a woman who crossed the world to find her father and found him too far gone to save. She carries these weapons not for adventure, but for the specific purpose of protecting herself long enough to find someone she loves. The love is in the weapons, the specific kind of love that takes a practical form, that expresses itself in the decision to become capable enough to survive a dangerous journey, rather than in the more conventional expressions that the situation did not allow. The score of the Dark Souls trilogy is one of the most carefully crafted in the history of games, and like everything else in the series, its secrets reward attention. The opening theme of Dark Souls 1, the music that plays over the introduction cinematic, is built around a choir that sings in a mode that does not resolve. Music that resolves, that reaches its destination harmonically and rests there, produces a feeling of completion, of arrival. Music that does not resolve produces a feeling of incompleteness, of a question that has not been answered, of something ongoing. The opening theme of Dark Souls 1 does not resolve. It circles, it builds and releases and builds again without arriving anywhere final. This is the cycle made musical. The theme is not simply atmospheric, it is structural. It describes the shape of the world before you've seen it. The boss themes of the trilogy are studies in how music can communicate character without words. Gwyn's theme, played in his boss fight, is a piano piece, not orchestra, not choir. A single piano playing a melody that sounds less like battle music and more like a lament. Gwyn does not roar at you. He does not speak. His theme does not threaten. It mourns. The most powerful being of the Age of Fire, reduced to a hollow shell defending the dying embers of everything he sacrificed himself to preserve, fights you to a piano melody that sounds like grief. The game tells you through the music that what you are fighting is not a monster, but a tragedy. What you do with that understanding is yours to decide. The Moonlight Sonata. This is the most discussed musical reference in the trilogy, and it is entirely unconfirmed by the developers, which makes it more interesting rather than less. The theme of Seath the Scaleless, the mad dragon archivist of Duke's archives, contains passages that bear resemblance to Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 14, the Moonlight Sonata. The piece is associated with unrequited love in popular understanding, with longing for something unattainable, with the specific ache of reaching for a light that illuminates but does not warm. Seath spent his existence reaching for immortality, for acceptance, for the thing that his scaleless birth denied him. Whether the musical resemblance is intentional, whether the composers were deliberately invoking Beethoven, the emotional resonance is real. Seath's theme sounds like longing. It sounds like someone who wanted something they could never have and spent their entire existence trying to get it anyway. Aldrich's theme in Dark Souls 3 incorporates the theme of Guinevere from the first game, distorted and slowed and darkened, barely recognizable, because Aldrich consumed Gwyndolin. Because what Aldrich is now contains something of what the last god of Anor Londo was. The music carries the memory of the person who was eaten inside the mass of the thing that ate them, faint and wrong in a specific way that is not random but deliberate. The theme says, if you are listening carefully, something of what this was is still in here. It does not feel good, but it is here. The Firelink Shrine theme, the music that plays in the hub area of the first game where you rest between areas and speak to the NPCs gathered there, is one of the most beloved pieces of music in the trilogy. It is gentle, understated, a lute and some strings, playing a melody that is melancholy without being despairing, that is quiet without being empty. It is the music of a place where people rest who are not sure they deserve rest, where undead warriors who've been killing things all day sit by a fire and try to remember why they're doing it, where the game offers you in musical form exactly what a bonfire offers in mechanical form: warmth, a moment, enough to keep going, a final word before you rest. The Dark Souls trilogy is many things: a punishing game that teaches through failure, an intricate mythology built with archaeological precision, a meditation on cycles and sacrifice and the specific human quality of continuing in the face of everything that argues against it. A world full of characters whose tragedies are buried so carefully that finding them feels like an act of excavation rather than entertainment. But underneath all of those things, it is also a question. The same question across 3 games, asked in different ways, from different angles, by different characters who have each encountered their version of it and found their own insufficient answers. The question is this: if you know the cycle, if you know what the fire costs and what it produces and what it eventually becomes, if you understand that linking the fire extends an age that will end anyway, and that the darkness waiting on the other side may be the natural and even the right successor to the fire, knowing all of this, what do you do? The game does not answer for you. It gives you the evidence, it gives you the history, it gives you the characters who have each grappled with the question and found answers that satisfy them for better or worse. And then it puts the choice in your hands and steps back. You can link the fire and extend the age because something worth preserving exists within it, and deserves more time even if that time is borrowed. You can walk away and let the dark come because the dark is not the enemy it has been presented as, and the age it inaugurates may be something genuinely new. You can take the fire for yourself and become what Gwyn feared because humanity's inheritance has been suppressed long enough. Or you can simply refuse every framing the game offers and find your own answer in the space between the options it presents. What matters, the Trilogy suggests, is not which choice you make, but whether you make it with full understanding, whether you choose while knowing the cost, whether you have done the work of understanding what you are choosing and why, rather than simply following instructions or taking the path of least resistance. This is the lesson the bonfires have been teaching all along. Rest. But not forever. The world does not stop while you rest. The darkness is still out there. The cycle is still turning. And when you have rested enough, when you have sat with what you know and what you do not know, and the specific weight of the choice in front of you, you stand up and you walk back into it. Rest now. You've been walking for a long time tonight. You have heard the histories of gods who were afraid and kings who loved the wrong people, and knights who kept their posts after everyone who gave them orders was dead. You have walked through cities that remembered everything and ruins that were built on other ruins and the ash of cycles too numerous to count. You have earned the quiet. Let the bonfires burn low for a little while. Let the dark come gently, the way dark always comes when it is not being kept out. Let it be simply the absence of light for a few hours, not the cosmic inheritance of the furtive pygmy, not the age of dark that Gwyn spent his existence preventing, just the ordinary dark of a night that will end when it ends. You carried the dark sign tonight. You chose to understand what it meant. That is enough for one evening. The covenants of Dark Souls are not simply multiplayer mechanics. They are the game's most explicit representation of the different philosophical positions available in response to the Age of Fire's dying, each one offering a different answer to the question of what the undead should be doing and why. The Way of White is the oldest and most ordinary covenant, a simple faith in the traditions of Thorolund and the belief that the Age of Fire's continuation is worth serving. Its members are unremarkable. They are the background of the world, the people who have accepted the framing they were given without examining it too closely. Most of Lordran's population before the current crisis would have operated within the assumptions of the Way of White without even recognizing them as assumptions. The Covenant's secret is that it is not a choice in any meaningful sense. It is the default. It is what you believe when you have not yet had cause to question. The Sun Covenant, the warrior of Sunlight Covenant that Solaire belongs to, is dedicated to the praise of the sun and the practice of cooperative assistance. Its members leave their golden signs for others to use, offering their strength to help strangers through difficulties. The Covenant is built on a genuine philosophy that cooperation is more powerful than individual heroism, that the willingness to help is itself a form of divinity. Solaire's sun may not exist as a physical object he can find, but the Covenant's philosophy, the idea that helping others is its own form of light, is as close to a genuinely good answer as the game offers. The tragedy of Solaire is not that his philosophy is wrong, it is that the world is not arranged to reward it. The Forest Hunter Covenant, which asks you to protect Sif's forest from intruders, is the game's most obvious covenant of grief. It exists to protect a specific place, the grave of Artorias, from the people who would violate it. The Darkwraith Covenant is the most transgressive, dedicated to the power of the Dark Soul in its raw form, to harvesting humanity from others, to the power that the Abyss represents at its most concentrated. These two covenants sit at opposite ends of the game's moral spectrum, one protecting something sacred out of love and the other taking from others out of ambition, and the game allows you to join either without commentary or judgment. The Chaos Servant Covenant is perhaps the most philosophically interesting. It asks you to serve Quelag's sister, the Fair Lady, who lies hidden beneath Blighttown, infected with chaos eggs, burning from within with the fire that destroyed her family, barely alive, tended by her sister with a desperate and heartbreaking devotion. Quelag harvests humanity from the humans who stumble into her lair, feeding it to her sister to ease her pain. The sister can barely speak, she can barely perceive what is happening around her, and yet she thanks you if you join her covenant and offer her humanity with a genuine warmth that suggests she knows what she is receiving even if she cannot fully process it. The covenant is service to suffering. It asks you to give something of yourself to ease pain that you did not cause, in service of a being who can offer you almost nothing in return. It is, in this sense, the closest thing to pure charity that the game offers. The Princess's Guard covenant, serving the illusory Guinevere, is the covenant of the Age of Fire's most elaborate lie. You serve an image, a projection, something that looks divine and feels divine, and asks for your service in the name of Gwyn's daughter, and is none of those things except looking. The game allows you to serve this covenant seriously, to treat the illusion as the reality it claims to be, to function within the pretense exactly as its architect intended. Whether this is simply foolishness, or whether there is something worth serving in the idea of Guinevere even when the reality has departed, is a question the game does not answer. The Blade of the Dark Moon, Gwyndolin's covenant, is the law enforcement of the Age of Fire. Its members hunt invaders, protect the faithful, serve the last god in Anor Londo with the dedication that mirrors Gwyndolin's own. To serve the Blade of the Dark Moon is to serve a god who was hidden away by his father because his nature was inconvenient, who has maintained an entire city's illusion of glory out of love for that same father, who has been doing the job of the Age of Fire's continuity with less and less to work with for a very long time. Serving the Blade of the Dark Moon is serving loyalty itself, this specific kind of loyalty that does not require its object to be worthy. The bosses of the Dark Souls trilogy are not simply combat challenges. Each of them is a narrative endpoint, the final expression of a story that has been told across the game's world in fragments that only fully cohere when you stand before them and understand what you are looking at. The Asylum Demon, the first boss of Dark Souls 1, is a demon born from the Chaos Flame's corruption of the Asylum. It is enormous and clumsy, and much more manageable than almost anything else you will face in the game, and this is deliberate. The Asylum Demon is the game's initial calibration, its way of setting expectations that it will immediately subvert. You fight it with a broken sword, you barely survive, and then you find your actual weapons and return and kill it properly, and the game has taught you something before any tutorial text has appeared. Retreat, regroup, return when you are ready. The lesson the entire trilogy will repeat. The Moonlight Butterfly is one of the strangest and saddest bosses in the first game, a creature that exists in the forest above Darkroot Garden, flying in circles above a fog gate that you have to walk through to reach it. It is enormous and luminescent and entirely passive until you approach it. It does not hunt you. It does not patrol. It simply flies, producing the moonlight that gives it its name. And when you enter its territory, it responds to your presence, but without any evident aggression in its behaviour. It seems for something you have to kill to progress, remarkably unbothered by your existence. The item description for the soul you receive from it notes that it was once a creature of the forest, transformed by the moon's power into what it is now. It was something ordinary once. The transformation gave it beauty and took everything else. The Bed of Chaos, the most controversial boss in the first game from a gameplay perspective, is the least conventional boss encounter in the trilogy, and also the most lore-rich. You are not fighting a creature, you are fighting the consequence of an experiment. The Witch of Izalith attempted to recreate the first flame. She failed catastrophically. What remains of her is not a body or a spirit or a consciousness in any conventional sense. It is an active catastrophe, a process rather than a being, the chaos flame in the shape of the thing it consumed. Fighting the Bed of Chaos requires you to destroy the two structures keeping it alive before reaching for its heart, and the heart, when you reach it, simply falls in. The witch is already gone. There is nothing left of her to fight. The battle is the aftermath of her destruction, still destroying everything around it. The four kings, fought in the abyss of New Londo, are the most conceptually interesting boss in the first game. You fight four kings. Or you fight the echo of four kings, their forms corrupted and enlarged by the abyss beyond what their original selves would have been. They come in succession, each one emerging from the darkness as the previous one dies, and if you take too long they overlap, 2 or 3 or all 4 present simultaneously. This is the abyss's nature made mechanical. The dark that consumed New Londo does not simply corrupt, it enlarges, it amplifies, it takes the power that was already there and makes it more, not better, just more, without the constraints that kept the original power purposeful. The four kings were given fragments of Gwyn's soul. The abyss took that power and made it enormous and empty, the specific kind of power that has grown past anything its holder can direct. Gravelord Nito, the first of the dead, is fought in the Tomb of the Giants, one of the darkest and most disorienting areas in the game. His boss arena is a mass of bodies and bones. He rises from them as a figure made of bones himself, wrapped in a tattered shroud, wielding a great scythe. He is death as an aesthetic, death as a being with domain, death as something that has accumulated all the dead of all the ages and wears them. His connection to Gwyn's age is ambiguous. He was one of the 4 original lords. He used his soul to create the miasma of death and disease that Gwyn used against the dragons. And then he retreated to his tomb and has been there ever since, tending the dead, performing the role the Age of Fire assigned to him, keeping the dead dead in a world where the undead curse makes that difficult. Seath the Scaleless in his boss fight is found at the heart of his archive, surrounded by the results of his experiments. The patients in the archive, those undead who stumbled between bookshelves in confusion and distress, were once people who came to his archive and were taken. They are being used in his search for immortality. He has already achieved immortality technically through the primordial crystal, but he has lost the capacity to understand that he has achieved it, which means he continues the search endlessly, conducting experiments on beings who can feel them in service of a goal that has already been accomplished. His madness is the specific madness of someone who achieved their goal and then forgot they had it, who continues trying to arrive somewhere they're already standing. Kalameet, the optional boss of the Prepare to Die edition, is one of the most ancient and most powerful beings you encounter in Dark Souls 1. He is an everlasting dragon, one of the ancient creatures of the age before fire, and he bears the mark of calamity on his forehead, a dark eye that is said to bring misfortune to all who look upon it. He is not a boss who was created by the Age of Fire's conflicts. He predates all of them. He is simply a very old and very powerful creature who has survived from the Age of Ancients through the Age of Fire into whatever the current moment is, and he is deeply, specifically angry Not at you personally, but at the world that killed his kind and the civilization that built itself on their destruction. Fighting Calamite is fighting something that has a legitimate grievance with the entire Age of Fire, and the fact that you have to fight him anyway is one of the game's least comfortable necessities. The world of Dark Souls 3 is the most densely layered of the three games' worlds, built on accumulated history in ways that reward careful reading, even for players who have completed the previous games multiple times. The undead settlement is one of the most visually striking areas in the game, a hillside village that has been built and rebuilt and built again on top of itself, with layers of history visible in the architecture if you look carefully. The bodies hanging from the central tree, the grotesque monument to the pontiff's theology, the giant who throws firebombs from a distance until you climb to him and find he's keeping a crow that has been nesting in his hand, tending it carefully, giving it food. The giant is not aggressive. He throws firebombs at anything that moves below because that is the role he was assigned, but he has also found something worth caring for in the meantime. A crow in his palm, a small life in the middle of his enormous and purposeless duty. He will not harm you once you reach him. He simply continues tending his bird. The Cathedral of the Deep is perhaps the most complete statement of religious corruption in the entire trilogy. It was a place of genuine faith once, dedicated to Velka, goddess of sin, a place where the guilty came to confess and be absolved, where the machinery of spiritual accountability was maintained by clergy who believed in the value of that machinery, and then Aldrich, and then the deacons who discovered that the depth Aldrich sought could be served rather than resisted, that the abyss of his hunger was something that could be converted into a theology rather than condemned. The cathedral became a place of worship for consumption rather than absolution, for the deep rather than the light, for the specific religiosity of people who have decided that what is powerful must be divine. Irithyll of the Boreal Valley is the most beautiful location in the game and the one most deeply associated with the false promise of the Age of Fire's continuation. It is a city of silver and moonlight and cold, built in the time when Gwyndolin still maintained his presence in the world, built by followers of the pontiff who claimed to serve the last god while actually serving their own ambitions. It is beautiful the way lies are beautiful when they are told well. Every visual element communicates grandeur and divinity and the specific quality of a civilization that believes in itself completely. And the people who built it are the people who consumed Gwyndolin and used his name and his authority to justify their own power. The beauty is real. The civilization that produced it was not what it claimed to be. The Dreg Heap, the opening area of the Ringed City DLC, is the most visually explicit representation of cyclical history in the entire trilogy. It is a vast pile of accumulated material from previous ages, layers of history compressed into geology, the ruins of Lothric's churches visible above and the older ruins visible beneath them and older still beneath those. You're not simply descending, you are reading. Each layer of the heap is a layer of the world's history compressed by time, still identifiable if you know what you're looking at. The Dreg Heap is the game's thesis statement about history. It accumulates, it compresses. The old does not disappear. It simply becomes the foundation for the new, and the new eventually becomes the foundation for whatever comes after, and this process does not have a natural stopping point. The ringed knights who guard the approaches to the ringed city itself carry a secret in their design that is visible if you look closely. Their armour is fused to their bodies. Not merely worn, but integrated, grown into their skin, bonded with them in a process that cannot be reversed. The gods bound this armour to them as punishment for daring to claim the fire, and they have been wearing it since before the current age began. When you fight them, you are fighting beings who have been wearing their punishment for longer than any of the current civilizations have existed. They are the most ancient enemies in the Trilogy, older than the linking of the fire, older than Gwyn's sacrifice, older than everything you have fought in the 3 games put together, and they are furious with the patience so old that it has become geological. Slave Knight Gale's questline, which runs through the Ashes of Ariandel and the Ringed City DLCs, is the most complete, individual narrative arc in the Trilogy. He begins as a servant, collecting the ash of the painted world at the request of the painter, running errands for someone he loves in the quiet way that servants of long-standing love those they serve. He ends as the container of the dark soul of all humanity, ancient beyond comprehension, fighting you at the literal end of the world. The distance between those 2 points is extraordinary. He chose this path. He understood what it would cost. He did it anyway, not out of heroism, not out of ambition, but out of the simple desire to get the painter what she needed to paint her world. He gave everything for someone who was painting something that might be different. Whether it will be different is the question the Trilogy leaves open, but he gave everything for the possibility that it might, and the possibility was enough. There are details in the Dark Souls trilogy that do not fit into any category, except the category of things that are worth knowing before you sleep. Small things, precise things, the kind of things that accumulate until the world feels genuinely inhabited rather than simply constructed. The way bonfire flames change colour depending on the proximity to chaos corruption. The way Smoo laughs when he kills you. A specific laugh that sounds less triumphant and more genuinely pleased, as though Smach is doing the one thing in his life that he actually enjoys. The way that falling off edges in certain areas produces a death message saying you'll need their guidance, the guidance of the item you just lost, as though the world is commenting on the specific foolishness of falling off something. The way the stone lizards that carry upgrade materials scuttle away from you, with a speed that seems personally motivated, as though they have dealt with hunters before and have learned that running is always the right choice. The way Solaire's sign, when you summon him for certain boss fights, shows a player doing the sun praise gesture while running, which looks deeply undignified and is also exactly what Solaire would do. The way Patches is found hanging from a ledge in the catacombs the first time you meet him, placed there presumably by his own attempt to loot something, requiring your help to get down, grateful and then immediately suspicious and then resigned and then eventually a merchant. The way Siegmeyer's armour smells faintly of pungent during the character's idle animations. The way Sif uses the sword differently as the fight progresses, holding it in different ways, adjusting to the damage taken, fighting differently when limping than when fresh. These details are not necessary to the lore. They do not change the story. They are simply evidence of the extraordinary care with which this world was made. Someone decided how Sif would hold the sword. Someone decided what Smoo's laugh would sound like. Someone decided that Solaire would praise the sun while running. These are not accidents. They are choices made by people who loved the world they were building enough to make the small choices as carefully as the large ones. And that love, that specific quality of attention to the details that most people will never notice, is what makes the world of Dark Souls worth returning to. Not the challenge, not the lore, though the lore is extraordinary, the evidence everywhere in every small detail that this world was made by people who cared about it, who wanted it to feel real, who understood that a world feels real not through its grand gestures, but through its small true things. You have been in that world tonight. You have heard its grand gestures and its small true things both. You have earned the rest that the bonfires offer. Let the fire burn low. Let the dark be simply dark for a few hours. Let Lordran and Drangleic and Lothric continue without you for a while. They will be there when you return. The cycle will still be turning. The bonfires will still be lit. And there will always be more to find. The Dark Souls trilogy is many things: a punishing game that teaches through failure, an intricate mythology built with archaeological precision, a meditation on cycles and sacrifice and the specific human quality of continuing in the face of everything that argues against it, a world full of characters whose tragedies are buried so carefully that finding them feels like an act of excavation rather than entertainment. But underneath all of those things, it is also a question. This same question, across 3 games, asked in different ways, from different angles, by different characters who have each encountered their version of it and found their own insufficient answers. The question is this: if you know the cycle, if you know what the fire costs and what it produces and what it eventually becomes, if you understand that linking the fire extends an age that will end anyway, and that the darkness waiting on the other side may be the natural and even the right successor to the fire, knowing all of this, what do you do? The game does not answer for you. It gives you the evidence, it gives you the history, it gives you the characters who have each grappled with the question and found answers that satisfy them for better or worse. And then it puts the choice in your hands and steps back. You can link the fire and extend the age because something worth preserving exists within it and deserves more time even if that time is borrowed. You can walk away and let the dark come because the dark is not the enemy it has been presented as, and the age it inaugurates may be something genuinely new. You can take the fire for yourself and become what Gwyn feared because humanity's inheritance has been suppressed long enough. Or you can simply refuse every framing the game offers and find your own answer in the space between the options it presents. What matters, the trilogy suggests, is not which choice you make, but whether you make it with full understanding, whether you choose while knowing the cost, whether you have done the work of understanding what you are choosing and why. This is the lesson the bonfires have been teaching all along. Rest, but not forever. The world does not stop while you rest. The darkness is still out there. The cycle is still turning. And when you have rested enough, when you have sat with what you know and what you do not know, and the specific weight of the choice in front of you, you stand up and you walk back into it. Before we close tonight, I want to pause and thank you for being here through all of this. We have walked through the Age of Fire, through the Lords and their lies and their love and their fear, through the undead curse and the people it touched and broke and sometimes occasionally made into something worth remembering. If this journey through the world of Dark Souls meant something to you, please subscribe to Nightfall Lore and leave a comment below, and I want to know. Drop in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Your bed, your desk, somewhere else entirely. I read every single one and it means more than you know. Rest now. You've been walking for a long time tonight. You have heard the histories of gods who were afraid, and kings who loved the wrong people, and knights who kept their posts after everyone who gave them orders was dead. You have walked through cities that remembered everything, and ruins that were built on other ruins, and the ash of cycles too numerous to count. Let the bonfires burn low for a little while. Let the dark come gently, the way dark always comes when it is not being kept out. Let it be simply the absence of light for a few hours, not the cosmic inheritance of the furtive pygmy, not the age of dark that Gwyn spent his existence preventing, just the ordinary dark of a night that will end when it ends. You carried the dark sign tonight. You chose to understand what it meant. That is enough for one evening. Sleep well, good undead. May the flame guide thee.